89,000 people watched Diane Mitchell get kidnapped. Not one of them could help her. The car doors locked with a sound like a coffin closing. Click. Diane Mitchell froze, her hand still on the door handle. Through the rearview mirror, she watched the driver's face change, suspicion hardening into certainty, certainty into action. His phone was already recording, already live streaming. "Hey everyone, Jake Sullivan here. So I just picked up someone claiming to be a city councilwoman." Claiming, not who says she's or who might be. Claiming, the word that meant he'd already convicted her of fraud before asking a single question. The view counter began climbing. 47, 183, 891. Every number was another witness to her powerlessness. Every number was another person learning that a black woman with a Palmer Woods address was guilty until proven innocent. And proving innocence was impossible when your phone was dead, your evidence was trapped in your briefcase, and the driver had already decided you were a liar. 3,847 views. "This your real name?" Jake asked, holding her driver's license under the dome light. He was Googling, doubting, certain that the exhausted black woman in wrinkled business clothes couldn't possibly be the polished councilwoman in the search results. 15,289 views. Diane's briefcase was full of documents proving exactly who she was, but her phone was dead. The doors were locked. And among those 15,289 viewers were 246 other Detroit drivers who belonged to a Facebook group called Real Talk Rideshare, watching this moment and learning exactly how to coordinate discrimination without calling it discrimination. 47,823 views. The sirens started as distant wails, but that moment was still 23 minutes away. Right now, Diane was just a woman locked in a car, watching herself become a spectacle, realizing that claiming to be who you actually are only works when someone believes you deserve to exist in places they've decided you don't belong. The live stream would hit 89,347 views before police arrived, but the word claiming would haunt both of them for the rest of their lives. 48 hours earlier, Jake Sullivan sat in his silver Malibu outside the Greektown Casino at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, dashboard glow turning his face ghostly blue. His thumb scrolled through Facebook with the autopilot rhythm of someone who'd spent too many hours in parking lots. The Real Talk Rideshare Detroit group notification glowed. Mike D313 posted in the group, "Zone 7 pickup equals auto cancel. These people never tip and always complain. Save yourself the headache." 43 drivers had already liked it. Jake added his thumb to the count, typed quickly, "Facts. Gotta protect ourselves." His father's voice echoed in his head. Lessons from kitchen table conversations that had shaped Jake's worldview more than any police academy training. Certain neighborhoods breed certain problems. Trust your instincts, not their excuses. The Uber app pinged green. Pickup, Coleman Young Municipal Building. Drop-off, Palmer Woods. Jake's eyes narrowed. Government building at midnight? Palmer Woods address? The math felt wrong, but the fare calculator looked right. He accepted and shifted into drive. While Jake navigated empty streets, Diane Mitchell had been awake for 17 hours straight. The day had started at 6:45 a.m. in her Palmer Woods kitchen, where coffee and turkey bacon filled the air, and her 16-year-old son Marcus sat at the counter with his phone propped against a cereal box, camera pointed at her like she was a documentary subject. "Baby, not today." Diane cracked eggs into a pan one-handed, checking her watch with the other. "Mama's got the budget vote, and I cannot have you filming every minute." "Mom, this is history." Marcus's voice carried that particular teenage conviction that made arguing pointless. "First black woman chairing public safety? That's my college essay happening in real time." She'd laughed, slid eggs onto his plate, straightened her navy blazer, the one she always wore for marathon sessions. "You're a junior. We've got time for essays." But she'd stood a little straighter anyway, just in case the camera was still rolling. That conversation felt like another lifetime now. 14 hours in city council chambers, debating a $2 billion budget line by line while her phone battery drained to nothing. During the 9:30 p.m. recess, she'd finally reviewed the stack her aide Jennifer flagged as urgent, rideshare complaints. 217 of them. Diane's trained eye, sharpened by 20 years driving a Detroit bus before law school, caught patterns immediately. Her pen circled names that repeated. Jake Sullivan appeared once, twice, 3 times. By the bottom of the stack, 23 complaints, all black passengers, all describing similar experiences. Her handwriting scrawled across the notepad. Pattern? All black passengers. Coordinate with city attorney tomorrow. She underlined pattern twice. Tomorrow never came the way she planned. At 10:47 p.m., reaching for her phone charger, the outlet sparked. Not dramatically, just enough to kill her already dying battery. The screen went black. Jennifer looked up with exhausted sympathy. "I'll call you an Uber." Diane shook her head, gathering papers. "I got it. You head home." She borrowed Jennifer's phone, requested a ride, watched the car icon appear. 3 minutes away. "Tomorrow we deal with these complaints. Monica Reyes, first thing." The Coleman Young Municipal Building looked different at night. Empty granite steps, pools of streetlight, shadows where thousands of citizens walked during daylight hours. Diane's heels clicked against stone, a sound that echoed in the November cold. Her blazer was wrinkled from 14 hours of leather chair creases, her shoulders carrying the weight of decisions that affected hundreds of thousands of lives. She saw the silver Malibu pull up, Uber sticker glowing in the rear window. She didn't see the driver's face clearly in the darkness, didn't see him glance at her, then at his phone, then back at her with an expression already calculating wrong answers to unasked questions. Diane opened the back door, slid into a seat that smelled faintly of air freshener, trying to mask too many passengers, too many late nights. Her briefcase settled beside her with a soft thud. "Hi, I'm going to Palmer Woods." She gave the address, 2847 Balmoral Drive, and leaned back, finally allowing herself to breathe. Through the window, downtown Detroit slid past in familiar patterns of light and shadow, the city she'd served for 6 years on council, 20 years before that from a bus driver's seat. Jake Sullivan's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror. Palmer Woods, Tuesday night, government building. His father's training kicked in. When the story doesn't make sense, trust your gut. He took in her wrinkled clothes, her exhaustion, the way she held herself with the careful stillness of someone who'd learned that sudden movements made certain people nervous. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. The silence stretched. Diane tried small talk, the kind that usually smoothed over awkwardness. "Long day? You work downtown?" Jake's voice was carefully neutral. "Government building?" "Yes, city council." Brief. The day had been too long for extended conversation. "Oh yeah?" His tone shifted, acquiring an edge Diane recognized immediately. The condescension that came with assumptions. "What, like administrative assistant?" The familiar weight of that question settled over Diane like old clothes. She'd heard variations for 6 years on council, 20 years on the bus, a lifetime in moments large and small. Something like that. Too tired to correct. Too tired to explain she'd just allocated $2 billion. Jake's phone buzzed. Another Facebook notification from the group. Another warning about problem passengers. His thumb twitched toward it, but he was driving. The route took them past downtown, through Midtown, into tree-lined neighborhoods where Detroit's wealth had retreated. Palmer Woods emerged from darkness like a different city. Mansions set back from streets, front lawns that could host weddings, historic brick and Tudor homes that had survived by existing in economic bubbles. Jake watched houses pass, each more expensive than the last, and his calculations shifted darker. "Which house is yours?" 2847 Balmoral. Diane pointed ahead at a 3-story brick colonial with ivy climbing its facade. The circular driveway. Jake slowed but didn't approach. While the car idled at a stop sign, his thumb moved across his phone. Google Street View loaded. The house appeared. Brick and history. Circular driveway. Windows glowing with old money in daylight photos. He scrolled down. Zillow estimate. $890,000. His jaw clenched visibly. He looked at Diane in the mirror again. Not a tired public servant, but a puzzle piece that didn't fit his worldview. A black woman claiming $1 million $100,000 home, cleaning staff with expensive addresses, government worker with council exhaustion who couldn't possibly belong in neighborhoods like this. His face hardened into something Diane had seen before on countless faces. The look that said, "You don't belong here," that said something's wrong with this picture, that said, "I'm going to figure out what you're really doing." Jake's voice cut through the car's interior, and Diane recognized the tone before he finished speaking. The same tone she'd heard in 1,000 police testimony recordings from officers who'd already decided guilt before asking the first question. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need to see some ID." He paused, and Diane's hand moved instinctively toward the door handle, even though she already knew what came next. "And if you can't provide legitimate proof you live at that address, we're going to have a problem." The word problem hung in the air like a threat. Diane's hand tested the door handle. It didn't move. The door wouldn't open. Diane's hand pulled the handle once, then again, feeling the mechanism refuse to budge with the finality of a decision already made. Through the rearview mirror, she watched Jake's eyes shift from suspicious to certain, watched his hand reach for the phone mounted on his dashboard. The recording light blinked red. He was live streaming this. "And if you can't provide legitimate proof you live at that address," Jake repeated, his voice taking on the practiced cadence of someone performing for an audience he couldn't see but knew was gathering, "we're going to have a problem." Diane's exhaustion evaporated instantly, replaced by the hyper-awareness that came from decades of navigating situations exactly like this. She'd driven a Detroit city bus for 20 years, had learned to read danger in rearview mirrors, had developed the particular calm that came from knowing panic made things worse. She kept her voice level, professional, the same tone she used when a council member was about to make a procedural error that would cost them a vote. "I have my driver's license right here." She reached slowly for her purse, her movements deliberate. Sudden gestures made certain people nervous, and this driver was already radiating tension like heat off summer asphalt. "My phone died, but I have my license." Jake watched her hand move toward the purse with the suspicious attention of someone trained to see threats in ordinary actions. His police academy training, 4 years before he'd been terminated for excessive force complaints, had never really left him. His father's training had gone even deeper. Watch their hands. Always watch their hands. When the story doesn't make sense, trust your gut, not their excuses. Diane pulled out her wallet, extracted her Michigan driver's license, held it up where Jake could see it through the rearview mirror. The plastic card caught streetlight, her photo from 2 years ago, taken right after her committee appointment, showing her in formal attire that looked nothing like her current exhaustion. "Diane Marie Mitchell, the address matches what I gave you." Jake took the license, holding it under the dome light. His eyes scanned the name, the address, the photo that showed a polished professional, while the woman in his back seat looked like she'd been through 14 hours of hell. The math still didn't add up in his mind. His thumb moved across his phone screen, typing one-handed while the live stream captured everything. Google, Diane Mitchell, Detroit. The search results loaded immediately. City Council webpage, news articles. Councilwoman Mitchell chairs Public Safety Committee. Detroit's first black woman to lead public safety oversight. Professional headshots that bore only passing resemblance to the tired woman behind him. Jake looked at the license photo, then at the search results, then at Diane in the back seat. His father's voice echoed in his head. "People lie. Documents can be faked. Your instincts kept you alive on the streets. Trust them now." The live stream view counter in the corner of his screen climbed. 47 viewers, 183, 412. "This your real name?" The question came out flat, almost bored, but carried an accusation underneath. Diane felt the familiar weight of that question, the one that assumed documents could be forged, identities could be stolen, that a black woman with an expensive address and a government job must be lying about one or both. "Of course it's my real name." The absurdity of the question almost made her laugh, but the sound died in her throat when she saw his expression harden. Jake's thumb kept scrolling, comparing photos like he was conducting an investigation instead of an identity check. The woman in the search results wore makeup, professional styling, the armor of political office. The woman in his back seat wore exhaustion, wrinkled clothes, and the particular vulnerability of someone who'd let their guard down after a long day. To Jake, trained by his father to see threats and by 4 years of police work to distrust coincidences, these felt like two different people. Nah, the word carried absolute certainty. No way. No way what? Diane's voice stayed level, but something shifted in her posture, the recognition that this situation was escalating beyond reason. Lady, you're trying to tell me you're the city councilwoman? Jake twisted in his seat to look at her directly, no longer satisfied with the rear-view mirror's reflection. His phone's camera captured both of them now. Him, concerned citizen protecting himself from fraud. Her, suspect caught in a lie. You're claiming to be Diane Mitchell, chair of the Public Safety Committee? I'm not claiming anything. Diane's voice sharpened despite her best efforts. I am the city councilwoman, and you need to unlock this door and let me out of this car. Now. The word claiming hung between them like an accusation. Jake heard it as confirmation of his suspicions. Guilty people always got defensive when caught. Diane heard it as the word that would define this entire nightmare, the word that meant he'd convicted her before asking a single question. Yeah, and I'm the mayor. Jake's voice dripped with sarcasm. He was building a narrative now, each piece clicking into place in his mind with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved. Look, I know a scam when I see one. Someone steals a phone, finds an Uber account with payment info, orders a ride to a rich neighborhood, hoping the real owner won't notice until tomorrow morning. His voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining obvious logic to a person pretending not to understand. I've seen this exact playbook before. The car rolled slowly past 2847 Balmoral. Diane watched her porch light slide by through the window, glowing like a beacon 20 feet away that might as well have been 20 miles. That was my house. You just passed my house. Right. Jake pressed the accelerator, his decision made. Your house. Diane's hand moved back to the door handle, testing it again, even though she knew the result. Nothing. She pulled harder. The lock held firm. Unlock this door. Not until we verify who you really are. Jake's voice had taken on a quality Diane recognized from 1,000 interactions with a certain type of authority figure. The calm certainty of someone who'd already decided guilt and was just going through the motions of proof. I'm not letting a fraud walk away. That's how drivers get deactivated. That's how we lose our livelihoods because some scammer files a complaint. He pulled into a 7-Eleven parking lot, the fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving through the windows. The store glowed behind them, but it was nearly midnight, and the place looked empty except for a clerk behind bulletproof glass. No witnesses, no help, just a parking lot and a driver who'd decided she was criminal. The locks engaged again with a sound that seemed louder this time. Click, more final. Diane pulled the handle once more, heard the mechanism refuse, and felt her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with her 14-hour workday. Her briefcase sat beside her, full of proof. Her dead phone sat in her purse, useless. And Jake's livestream counter kept climbing. 3,847 viewers, 8,124, 12,386. Turn that camera off. Diane's voice carried her prosecutor training now. Command tone, legal authority. This is illegal. You're recording me without consent. You're holding me against my will. This is false imprisonment. But Jake was already speaking to his audience, his voice transforming into the persona he'd cultivated over months of live streaming real talk moments to his growing following. Hey everyone, Jake Sullivan here with another real talk moment. So I just picked up a fare who's claiming to be a city councilwoman, says she's Diane Mitchell, chair of the Public Safety Committee. He angled the phone to capture Diane in the back seat. She turned her face away, but there was nowhere to hide in the confined space. The camera found her anyway. Turn that camera off. This is illegal. Diane's words were precise, measured, but they just fed into his narrative. What's illegal is fraud, ma'am. Jake's voice carried righteous indignation for his growing audience, now 15,000 strong and climbing. This is why our taxes are so high, folks. People gaming the system, stealing identities, ordering rides they don't pay for. Someone's got to stand up and say enough is enough. The comments section exploded across his screen, a real-time Greek chorus of strangers weighing in on her guilt or innocence based on 30 seconds of context. LOL, she looks guilty AF, appeared next to, "This is kidnapping, bro," and, "Finally, someone standing up to these scammers," and, "Call the cops on her." The view count climbed, 15,289, 18,742, 23,156. Jake read the comments aloud like a prosecutor citing evidence. Okay, multiple people saying I should call the cops. You're right, that's exactly what I'm going to do." He held up his phone so his audience could watch him dial, could participate in this moment of citizens' arrest theater. "Yeah, I need police at the 7-Eleven on Woodward and Grand. I'm detaining a possible identity thief who's trying to use a stolen Uber account." Diane's hand went to her own phone automatically. Muscle memory from years of handling crises, from being the person others called when systems failed. But the screen stayed black, the battery as dead as it had been when the outlet sparked an hour ago. She had no way to call her office, her family, her attorney Monica Reyes. No way to prove her identity beyond the license he'd already dismissed as fake. The view count kept climbing, 27,394, 35,821. 41,203. "I am the chair of Public Safety Oversight," Diane said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I oversee the regulations that govern your commercial license. Unlock this door or you will face federal charges for kidnapping and deprivation of civil rights." Jake turned the camera back on himself, his expression perfectly calibrated for maximum sympathy from his audience. "See how they threaten you? This is textbook welfare fraud behavior. Make accusations, play the victim, hope you back down before anyone checks the facts." He looked directly into the lens. "But we're not backing down anymore, are we, folks?" The comments section agreed. Thousands of strangers watching a city councilwoman locked in a car, unable to distinguish reality from the narrative Jake was building with practiced ease. Among those 41,000 viewers were 246 other Detroit rideshare drivers, members of a Facebook group Jake had joined 3 months ago, watching this moment and learning exactly how to handle passengers who didn't fit their expectations, learning how to frame suspicion as safety, learning how to make discrimination look like due diligence. The sirens started as distant wails, growing closer with each second. Diane sat perfectly still in the back seat, watching the view counter hit 47,000, watching herself become a spectacle for tens of thousands of strangers, and understanding with crystallizing clarity that this wasn't just about one driver's suspicion anymore. Somewhere in Detroit right now, 246 other drivers were watching this video. Some were taking notes. Some were sharing it to their own feeds. Some were thinking about passengers they'd canceled on, addresses they'd deemed suspicious, people they'd decided didn't belong in neighborhoods like Palmer Woods. Jake Sullivan thought he was protecting himself from fraud, but he was really teaching a masterclass in coordination, showing an audience how to weaponize suspicion, demonstrating that if you broadcast your discrimination with enough confidence, thousands of strangers would call it courage. The view counter hit 52,000, the sirens grew louder, and Diane realized that by the time police arrived to confirm who she was, the damage would already be viral, permanent, and impossible to undo.
That day, the view counter hit 67,000 as squad car headlights cut through the 7-Eleven parking lot like stage lighting. Jake Sullivan straightened in his seat with the confidence of someone who'd called for backup 1,000 times before. The muscle memory of his police years kicked in automatically. Position yourself advantageously, control the narrative first, make sure your version reaches official ears before anyone else's story can muddy the waters. He kept his phone camera rolling even though he'd ended the live stream minutes ago, adjusting the angle to capture the approaching officers. 2 officers emerged from the patrol car with the practiced economy of movement that came from years of responding to late-night calls. The first was a Latino man in his 40s, his uniform pressed despite the midnight hour, nameplate reading Garcia. The second was younger, Asian, female, her hand resting near her belt with the careful awareness of someone still learning when to relax. Officer Chen. They approached Jake's window from both sides, Garcia taking lead while Chen positioned herself where she could see into the back seat. Garcia's knock on the driver's window was professional, almost bored. This was probably the third or fourth suspicious person call of his shift. "What's the situation here?" Jake rolled down the window, his phone still recording, his audience of 67,000 having watched the entire detention unfold. "Got a passenger refusing to show legitimate ID, claiming she's Councilwoman Mitchell from City Council. I think she stole someone's phone and Uber account, probably planning to charge the ride to the real owner's credit card." His voice carried the easy authority of someone explaining obvious criminal behavior to colleagues who'd understand. "I detained her for your arrival rather than let a fraud walk away. That's how good drivers get deactivated. Someone files a complaint, claims we dropped them at the wrong address, and boom, we lose our income." Garcia's expression shifted slightly, something crossing his face too quickly to categorize. "Say that again. Who does she claim to be?" "Diane Mitchell. Says she's on City Council. Chairs the Public Safety Committee or something." Jake's tone made it clear how ridiculous he found this claim. "I Googled it, and yeah, there's a Diane Mitchell who's a councilwoman, but look at her." He gestured toward the back seat. "The real Councilwoman Mitchell looks nothing like this." Officer Chen had moved to the rear passenger window, her flashlight clicking on with a sound that seemed too loud in the parking lot's silence. The beam cut through the tinted glass, illuminating Diane's face with harsh white light. Chen's hand froze on the flashlight. Her other hand moved away from her belt. Her mouth opened slightly, closed, then opened again. "Oh my God!" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Sarge, that is Councilwoman Mitchell." Garcia's face went from tan to pale in the span of a single breath. He moved around Jake's car with sudden urgency, Chen's flashlight tracking his movement. Both officers could now see Diane clearly in the back seather wrinkled blazer, her exhausted face, her hands folded in her lap with the forced calm of someone maintaining control through sheer willpower. Garcia's voice came out strangled. "Jake, unlock these doors. Right now. Unlock them now." Jake's confidence fractured like glass under pressure. "Wait, what? No, this is a scam. Did you not hear what I just... Unlock the doors." Garcia's hand was on Jake's door handle, pulling it open before Jake could respond. The older officer's face had transformed completely, professional boredom replaced by something close to panic. "Councilwoman Mitchell, I'm so incredibly sorry. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Diane's door opened, and she stepped out slowly, her legs stiff from sitting in the same position too long. Chen steadied her with a hand on her elbow, the rookie officer's face showing a mix of concern and dawning horror at what she'd just walked into. Diane took a breath of cool midnight air that tasted like freedom and exhaust fumes. "I'm fine, Officer Garcia. Just ready to go home." Jake's phone lay on the dashboard, still recording, capturing everything. The view counter had reached 74,000. The comments section, visible on the screen, had exploded into chaos, half the viewers calling Jake hero, half calling him criminal, thousands of strangers debating in real time whether they'd just witnessed citizen protection or kidnapping. Garcia turned back to Jake, and his voice carried the weight of someone watching a career-ending mistake unfold in real time. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You just kidnapped a city councilwoman and broadcast it to half of Detroit." "Kidnapped?" Jake's voice rose, defensive and confused. "I was protecting riders from fraud. This is what we're supposed to do when something doesn't add up. I was following—" "You're not a cop anymore, Jake." Garcia's words hit like a physical blow. "You don't have protocol. You drive for Uber. And what you did is called false imprisonment, and you did it to someone who oversees my entire department's budget." Chen was already on her radio, her voice low and urgent. "Dispatch, we need a supervisor at our location. We have a situation involving Councilwoman Mitchell and a civilian detention." Jake reached up and stopped the recording, but the damage had already metastasized beyond any hope of containment. His hands shook as he watched Garcia help Diane, watched Chen's horrified expression, watched his entire understanding of the night collapse around him. How do you even know she's real? Jake's voice carried the desperate edge of someone whose worldview was crumbling. She could have faked that license. She could be, because I've testified in her committee hearing 6 times. Garcia's voice was flat now, exhausted by the sheer magnitude of Jake's mistake. Because every officer in this precinct knows exactly who Diane Mitchell is. Because we brief new recruits on the Public Safety Committee structure, and she's literally on slide 3 of the PowerPoint. He gestured at Chen. Officer Chen graduated from the academy 4 months ago. Chen, do you know who this is? Chen nodded, looking like she wanted to melt into the asphalt. Yes, Sarge. Councilwoman Mitchell chairs the committee that approves our equipment purchases and reviews our use of force reports. Garcia turned to Diane. Ma'am, I'm so sorry this happened. This is not how Detroit PD operates. Diane's response was measured, controlled, the voice of someone who'd spent years in political environments where every word could be weaponized. Officer Garcia, I know this isn't how Detroit PD operates. Unfortunately, I now have evidence that this is exactly how some rideshare drivers operate, and that's a problem I intend to address. Garcia pulled out his phone. Ma'am, we can drive you home, or I can call you another Uber. Call me another Uber. Diane's voice was firm. A different driver. Chen was already on her phone, but she hesitated. Councilwoman, the video, it's already everywhere. Twitter, Facebook. It's spreading on TikTok. She showed Diane the screen, where the Honor Justice for Mitchell was trending number 3 nationwide. Diane borrowed Garcia's phone, her fingers moving across the unfamiliar interface. Notifications exploded across the screen, 214 on Twitter alone. 8 missed calls from Marcus. The most recent text made her chest tighten. Mom, call me. Video of you is going viral. Are you okay? Everyone at school is sending it to me. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Her son had watched her trapped in a car. Her daughters would see it by morning. Every person she'd ever worked with, every constituent who'd voted for her, every political rival who'd been waiting for ammunition, they would all watch her locked in a back seat, powerless, while a man who'd decided she was a criminal broadcast her humiliation to the world. A silver Honda pulled into the parking lot before Garcia could dial. The driver was a black woman in her late 50s, her face creased with concern visible even from a distance. She rolled down her window as Diane approached. Councilwoman Mitchell? Oh my lord, I just saw the video. Baby, are you all right? How did you see it already? Diane's voice carried exhaustion and something close to dread. The driver held up her phone. Baby, it's all over Black Twitter. Justice for Mitchell is trending. Everyone's talking about it. She scrolled through her feed, showing Diane the explosion of reshares, the thousands of comments, the way her locked car nightmare had become a rallying cry. My son drives for Uber, too. He's been harassed by passengers just like this man harassed you. What happened to you tonight? That's been happening to us forever. Diane slid into the back seat of yet another stranger's car, but this time the doors stayed unlocked. This time the driver's eyes held sympathy instead of suspicion. The drive to Palmer Woods passed in a blur of streetlights and mounting notifications. By the time the Honda pulled into her circular driveway, Jake Sullivan's video had been reshared 12,000 times. The view count had stopped climbing at 89,347 views, 89,000 witnesses, to a moment that would change both their lives forever. Diane's front door opened before she reached the porch, and Marcus burst out with his phone already raised, his face showing the particular panic of a 16-year-old who'd watched his mother become a viral victim. Mom, are you okay? I'm going to make a response video. I'm going to tell everyone what really... Not tonight, baby. Diane's voice cracked for the first time since the car doors had locked. Please, not tonight. Marcus saw something in his mother's face that made him lower the phone immediately. He was 16 and thought he understood the world, but in that moment, he understood only that his mother needed him to be her son, not her documentarian. He put the phone in his pocket and wrapped his arms around her, feeling her shake with the adrenaline crash she'd been holding off for the past hour. Over Marcus's shoulder, through the front window, Diane could see her living room television. The local news was already running the story. Breaking, city councilwoman held against will by Uber driver, video goes viral. Her own face filled the screen, frozen in that moment of powerlessness, broadcast to anyone still awake at 1 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. 20 miles away, Jake Sullivan sat in his apartment, his phone ringing non-stop with numbers he didn't recognize. Half were death threats, half were media requests. All of them represented the complete disintegration of the life he'd built after losing his badge. Through his window, he could see headlights pulling into his building's parking lot. A truck he recognized immediately, his father's Ford F-250, the one with the thin blue line sticker still visible, despite 3 years of retirement. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. "Stay put. Don't talk to anyone. I'm coming up. We fix this together." Jake stared at the message, then at his phone screen showing the video he'd filmed, now stopped at 89,347 views. The shares, 12,486. The comments still rolling in, thousands of strangers debating whether he was hero or criminal. But one comment kept appearing over and over, posted by different accounts with slight variations. "That was really Councilwoman Mitchell. My cousin works at City Hall. That was really her." Jake's thumb scrolled through his camera roll, finding the moment he'd paused to screenshot. Diane's face, locked in his car, looking directly at the camera. Not angry, not scared, just tired. Like she'd seen this before. Like she'd expected it. Like this was just another Tuesday night for a black woman in America. His father's footsteps echoed up the stairwell, heavy and familiar. The knocking started loud, insistent, the knock of someone who expected immediate response. Jake's hand hovered over the doorknob. "We fixed this together," his father had said. But Jake was staring at Diane's face on his phone, at that expression of exhausted recognition, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if what his father called fixing was actually breaking things beyond repair. The word claiming echoed in his head. He'd said it with such certainty, such righteousness, claiming to be a councilwoman, as if her existence in that space was inherently suspicious, as if a black woman giving a Palmer Woods address was automatically a lie worth interrogating. He opened the door anyway. His father stood in the hallway, still wearing his old Detroit PD jacket, his face showing the particular determination of someone ready to go to war. "Don't say anything," Tom Sullivan said, stepping inside before Jake could speak. "I know exactly how to handle this." Jake closed the door behind his father, but his eyes went back to his phone one more time. 89,347 people had watched him make the biggest mistake of his life. And somewhere in Detroit, Diane Mitchell was trying to explain to her children why the world had watched their mother get treated like a criminal for the crime of existing while black in the wrong neighborhood. Some lessons, Jake was beginning to realize, couldn't be unlearned just because you'd started asking questions. But the questions themselves, those were new and terrifying and unavoidable. The phone in his hand felt heavier than it should. Not because of the device itself, but because of the weight of 89,000 witnesses who'd watched him become exactly what his father had trained him to be. The kitchen table in Jake Sullivan's apartment had seen better days. The laminate was peeling at the edges, coffee rings stained the surface in overlapping circles, and his father's thick hands rested on it now, with the weight of someone preparing to deliver a sermon. Tom Sullivan Sr. still wore his old Detroit PD jacket despite retiring 3 years ago. The fabric worn at the elbows, but the badge patch still visible. At 61, he carried himself like a man who'd never really left the force, just temporarily stepped away from active duty. Jake sat across from him at 7:15 a.m., hungover not from alcohol but from panic, his eyes red from a sleepless night spent watching his phone explode with notifications. 8,000 new Facebook friend requests. His inbox flooded with messages that split perfectly down the middle, half calling him a hero, half promising he'd never work in Detroit again. His hands shook as he reached for the coffee cup his father had made, strong and black the way Tom had always taken it during his patrol years. "Dad, I didn't know it was really her." Jake's voice came out hoarse, the same 3 words he'd been repeating to himself all night like a prayer that might change reality. "If I'd known she was actually the councilwoman, I never would have—" "Doesn't matter who she was." Tom's interruption was flat and final. "You followed your instincts. Passenger acting suspicious, giving you an address that didn't match her appearance, couldn't provide proper verification. You detained her until proper authorities could sort it out. That's protocol, son. Good protocol." "Protocol?" Jake stared at his father like he was speaking a foreign language. "Dad, I'm not a cop anymore. I'm an Uber driver. I drive people from point A to point B. That's it. That's the whole job." Tom's jaw tightened in that particular way that meant Jake had said something his father considered weakness. Once a cop, always a cop. It's not about the uniform. It's about the mindset. You see threats, you neutralize them. You identify suspicious behavior. You act. That badge may be gone, but the training stays here. He tapped his temple with 2 fingers. These people play victim. They weaponize the system against us, and good men get crucified for doing what's necessary. Jake's phone buzzed on the table between them, the vibration loud in the early morning silence. Another notification. Another comment on the video he'd taken down but couldn't delete from the internet's collective memory. He flipped the phone over, couldn't bear to see whether this one was support or condemnation. "These people," Jake repeated slowly, tasting the words his father used so casually. "You mean black people, Dad. Just say what you mean." "I mean criminals." Tom's voice rose slightly, defensive. "I mean people who think rules don't apply to them. I mean activists like this Mitchell woman who've been targeting cops for years, trying to defund us, destroy our pensions, make the streets unsafe for everyone. You think she gives a damn about public safety? She wants power, and she'll use whatever narrative gets her there." Jake opened his phone despite his better judgment, scrolling through the messages flooding his inbox. But one notification stood out, glowing red against the chaos. Real Talk Rideshare Detroit had tagged him in a post. He clicked it, watching the comments load. 47 drivers had responded in the 6 hours since his video went viral, and the tone was unanimous. "Brother, we got your back. This is exactly what we've been talking about. The fact that she's a councilwoman proves they've infiltrated everywhere. Weekly meeting tonight moved to 9 p.m. Jake needs to know he's not alone." Tom leaned over to see the screen, nodding with satisfaction. "See? Your brothers understand. The people who actually do this work, who see what you see every night, they know you did the right thing. It's only the activists and the media trying to twist it." Jake scrolled further, found a message from the group's admin. "Emergency meeting tonight, Rosie's Bar. We need to discuss coordinated response to the Mitchell situation. This affects all of us." The post had 83 reactions, nearly every verified member of the group weighing in with fire emojis and fist bump symbols. "Dad, I locked her in my car. On camera." Jake's voice cracked on the last word. "That's kidnapping. There's no spin that makes kidnapping okay." Tom stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum. That's them talking. That's her narrative getting into your head. You didn't kidnap anyone. You performed a citizen's detention of a suspected criminal until proper authorities could arrive. The fact that she turned out to be who she claimed doesn't change the validity of your suspicion. He paced to the window, looking down at the parking lot where news vans had started circling like vultures 2 hours ago. This Mitchell woman has been coming after police funding for 6 years. She wants civilian oversight boards, body cam requirements, use of force restrictions. She's been systematically destroying everything we built to keep this city safe. Or maybe, Jake said quietly, staring at his phone, she's been holding accountable the cops who deserve it. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the small kitchen. Tom turned from the window slowly, his face showing the particular disappointment reserved for sons who betrayed fundamental truths. Jake, son, those 23 excessive force complaints you got before they pushed you out? Every single one was bullshit activist campaigns. You know that. I know that. The department knew that, which is why half of them got dismissed. You did your job. You kept bad people off the streets, and they destroyed your career for it. All 23 complaints were from black suspects, Dad. Jake heard himself say the words he'd been thinking for 2 years, but never voiced aloud. Every single one. What are the odds of that? The odds? Tom's laugh was bitter and tired. 100%, son. Because those are the neighborhoods where crime happens, where resistance happens, where people have been taught that cops are the enemy instead of the solution. You worked those areas because that's where you were needed. Of course the complaints came from there. That's not racism, that's geography. Jake's phone buzzed again. A text from a number he didn't recognize. This is FBI Special Agent Terrence Williams. We need to talk about last night and the organization you're part of. Call me! A phone number followed, and Jake felt his stomach drop like he'd missed a step in the dark. 20 miles away, in a kitchen that could have come from an interior design magazine, Diane Mitchell's daughters had transformed the breakfast nook into a war room. Keisha, 24 and in her second year at Michigan Law, had printouts spread across the granite countertop like evidence at trial. Amber, 20 and home from Michigan State for what was supposed to be a brief visit, had her laptop open to 3 different news sites, all of them running the same story with slight variations in outrage level. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his own laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard with the focused intensity of a teenager on a mission. Diane looked worse than she felt, which was saying something. She'd managed 3 hours of sleep after filing the police report, 3 hours haunted by the sound of car doors locking and view counts climbing. Her blazer from yesterday hung over a kitchen chair, wrinkled and somehow symbolic of the entire night's humiliation. She wore her weekend clothes now, jeans and a Detroit Lions sweatshirt, looking more like the bus driver she used to be than the councilwoman she'd become. Mom, you need to press charges. Keisha's voice carried the prosecutorial certainty she was learning at law school. This is open and shut. False imprisonment, kidnapping, possibly hate crime enhancement given the racial element. Any prosecutor would take this case. I already filed a report. Diane's voice was steady but tired. Detective Martinez is handling it. But that's one driver, Keisha. One incident. That's not enough. Amber looked up from her laptop, her face showing the particular horror of someone discovering ugly truths about the world. Mom, it's not one driver. Look at this. She turned the screen around, showing a web page Diane didn't recognize. Facebook's blue interface, but a private group she'd never seen. Real Talk Rideshare Detroit, 247 members. Diane moved closer, her exhaustion evaporating as she read the posts Amber had screenshot. Zone 7 equals auto-cancel. These areas generate too many complaints. Another post. Has anyone else noticed the pattern with certain types of passengers? They always claim discrimination when you're just protecting yourself. A third. Weekly meetup at Rosie's. Bring your war stories. Marcus found it, Amber said, gesturing to her brother, who looked up from his laptop with the grim satisfaction of someone who'd gone hunting and found exactly what he feared. He created a fake profile this morning, pretended to be a new driver, and they accepted him into the group. Marcus turned his laptop around, showing the page he'd been monitoring. It's not just random complaints, Mom. They're coordinating. Look at this post from 3 days ago. He pointed to a message from a user named Tom S. Detroit PD. It's a map of Detroit divided into colored zones. Red zones are high-risk areas requiring extra caution. You want to guess which neighborhoods are colored red? Diane didn't need to guess. She'd spent 20 years driving a bus through Detroit. She knew exactly which neighborhoods would be marked dangerous by men who looked like Jake Sullivan. Show me the map. Marcus clicked through to an image that made Diane's hands curl into fists on the countertop. Detroit's east side, colored red. The neighborhoods around 8 Mile, red. Downriver communities, red. Southwest Detroit, red. Every majority Black and Latino neighborhood in the city marked as territory to avoid. And in the comments below the map, drivers sharing their strategies. I just cancel if the pickup is in Zone 7. Rating stays clean that way. If you have to pick up from red zones, keep the app open and your doors locked. These passengers know they can weaponize ratings, so protect yourself first. There's more, Marcus said, his voice dropping. He clicked to another screenshot, and Diane felt the world tilt slightly. A photo of an elderly Black woman standing on a street corner, clearly taken without her knowledge or consent. The caption read, "Same woman has requested rides 4 times this month, always 1 stars the driver. Recommend auto decline." 17 drivers had reacted with thumbs-up symbols. Diane's breath caught in her throat. She knew that woman. The floral print dress, the church hat, the patient way she stood with her purse held in both hands. That's Mrs. Dorothy Perkins. She volunteers at my campaign office. She doesn't drive anymore because of her cataracts, so she uses Uber to get to church, to the grocery store, to her doctor's appointments. Her voice shook with rage she was barely containing. They're sharing her photo. They're coordinating to deny her service. She's 78 years old. Keisha had gone pale, her law school training colliding with real-world cruelty. Mom, this isn't just discrimination. This is conspiracy. This is organized, coordinated denial of service based on race. This is federal civil rights violation material. Show me more, Diane said, her exhaustion replaced by the focused energy she recognized from her prosecutor years. The energy that came when a case shifted from personal grievance to systemic exposure. Show me everything Marcus found. For the next 20 minutes, they went through the screenshots. Coded language that wasn't quite explicitly racist, but left no doubt about intent. Urban passengers. Cultural differences. Statistical risk factors. Driver after driver sharing stories of canceled rides. Locked doors. Routes that mysteriously malfunctioned when certain passengers requested them. And woven through it all, comments from Tom's Detroit PD offering advice, strategy, the kind of tactical guidance that suggested law enforcement training applied to civilian discrimination. Mom, Marcus said quietly, pulling up one final screenshot that made everyone in the kitchen go silent. This one was posted 6 hours ago, right after your video went viral. The post was from Jake Sullivan himself, and it had 134 reactions. Thanks for all the support, brothers. Meeting tonight to discuss next steps. They're coming after me, which means they're coming after all of us. We stand together, or we fall alone. Diane read it twice, her mind already shifting from victim to investigator, from wounded councilwoman to the prosecutor she used to be. Keisha, call Monica Reyes at the city attorney's office. Tell her I need to see her immediately. Amber, start documenting every post in that group, every photo, every comment. Marcus, keep monitoring. I want to know if they mention me, Mrs. Perkins, or any other specific individuals. What are you going to do, Mom? Keisha asked, already reaching for her phone. I'm going to show them that when you come after a city councilwoman, you don't just face consequences. You expose an entire system. Diane grabbed her blazer from the chair, suddenly feeling less like a victim and more like someone who'd just been handed evidence of the case she'd been building for years. This isn't about one bad driver anymore. This is about 247 drivers who think they can coordinate discrimination without consequences. An hour later, Diane sat across from Monica Reyes in the city attorney's office. The screenshots spread between them like accusations. Monica was 45, sharp as broken glass, and had been city attorney for 8 years. She'd prosecuted everything from municipal code violations to police misconduct cases, but the expression on her face now suggested she was looking at something she'd never quite encountered before. "This is substantial," Monica said slowly, flipping through the printouts. "But Diane, this is also complicated. Yes, the live stream gives you clear criminal charges against Sullivan. False imprisonment, possibly kidnapping depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wants to be. But pattern discrimination?" She tapped the Facebook screenshots. "That's federal civil rights territory. That's FBI Civil Rights Division. That's months of investigation, subpoenas, coordination with tech companies to get data that may or may not even exist anymore." "So we go federal," Diane said simply. "We bring in the FBI." Monica set down the papers and looked at Diane with the expression of someone about to deliver news the other person wouldn't want to hear. "There's a problem with that approach. You're the victim here, Diane. There's a massive conflict of interest. You can't lead an investigation into a crime committed against you. You can't be both the complainant and the prosecutor. The defense would tear that apart in court. Then who leads it? That's what I need to figure out." Monica picked up her office phone, the landline she used for calls she wanted documented and recorded. "But first, let me make some contacts. If this is as organized as it looks, we need people who specialize in conspiracy cases. People who understand tech evidence and pattern discrimination." She started dialing, then paused. "Diane, understand that if we go federal with this, it stops being about what happened to you last night. It becomes about systemic civil rights violations. Your incident becomes evidence in a much larger case. Are you ready for that?" Diane thought about Mrs. A. Dorothy Perkins standing on a corner in her church dress, marked and photographed and denied service by strangers who'd never met her. She thought about the 847 complaints Monica had mentioned were buried in app company databases. She thought about Marcus's face when he showed her that Facebook group, the disappointment in his eyes that the world he was inheriting contained men who coordinated racism like a business strategy. "Make the call," Diane said. Monica's phone rang twice before a voice answered, efficient and professional. "FBI Detroit Field Office. How may I direct your call?" "This is Monica Reyes, Detroit City Attorney. I need to speak with someone in the Civil Rights Division regarding a potential conspiracy case involving rideshare services and coordinated discrimination." She listened for a moment. Then her expression shifted slightly. "Yes, I'll hold." The hold music was generic and forgettable, but the silence in Monica's office felt heavy with potential. Diane's hands were steady on her lap, but underneath the calm exterior, her prosecutor's mind was already building the case, already seeing how the pieces fit together. One man's live stream had exposed a network. His father's advice revealed generational training. That Facebook group proved coordination. Mrs. Perkins's photo demonstrated targeting. The pattern was undeniable. The hold music cut off abruptly, replaced by a voice that was deep, assured, and carried the particular authority of someone who'd spent decades investigating exactly these kinds of cases. "This is FBI Special Agent Terrence Williams. I hear you have something for me." FBI Special Agent Terrence Williams looked exactly like someone who'd spent 20 years dismantling conspiracies. His office on the 9th floor of the Patrick V. McNamara Federal Building was sparse in that particular way that suggested the occupant spent more time in the field than behind a desk. Photos on the wall showed him shaking hands with various officials, receiving commendations, standing in front of crime scene tape. 46 years old, with close-cropped hair showing gray at the temples, and eyes that assessed everything twice before accepting it as fact. Diane sat across from him 3 hours after Monica's phone call, watching him scroll through the screenshots on his tablet with the methodical attention of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. He'd been silent for 4 minutes now, and the quiet was starting to feel intentional, a tactic to see if she'd fill the space with unnecessary information. "Textbook civil rights violation," Williams said finally, setting down the tablet. "Deprivation of rights under color of authority. The interesting legal question is whether Uber drivers count as operating under governmental authority, but there's precedent. They're licensed by the city, regulated by municipal code, essentially operating as commercial transportation with your council's approval." He looked at Diane directly. "Which means your committee, Councilwoman Mitchell. These drivers operate under licenses your committee issues and can revoke." "We can revoke their commercial licenses?" Diane leaned forward slightly. "Tomorrow?" "Individually, maybe, but not collectively without due process, and definitely not as punishment for exercising free speech, however vile." Williams pulled up a different screen on his tablet. "I've been monitoring rideshare discrimination complaints nationwide for 18 months. Detroit's in the top 5 cities for reported incidents. But here's what's interesting." He turned the tablet toward her, showing a heat map of the United States with red clusters in major cities. "It's not random. The highest complaint rates correspond to cities with specific demographic patterns and active driver coordination networks." "How many complaints?" Diane asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "In Detroit specifically? 847 complaints in the past 18 months. Williams let that number settle before continuing. "That's just what people reported to the app companies, who have zero legal obligation to share that data with us. The real number is almost certainly double or triple that." 847. Diane thought about her stack of 217 complaints, the ones that had made it through bureaucratic channels to her desk. The rest had been buried, dismissed, filed away by companies that had every financial incentive to pretend the problem didn't exist. "Most people don't report," Williams continued. "They just stop using the service, or they accept it as normal, or they complain to friends and family who tell them it's not worth the fight. But this Facebook group Marcus found?" He pulled up the screenshots again. "This is evidence of coordination. This is conspiracy to deprive civil rights. This is prosecutable under federal law." "Then prosecute them." Diane heard the steel in her own voice. "All of them. 247 drivers coordinating discrimination. Make an example that sends a message." Williams set down the tablet and folded his hands on his desk, the gesture of someone about to deliver uncomfortable truth. "Ma'am, I need to be direct with you about something. You're the victim in this case. That means you can't lead the investigation, you can't direct prosecution strategy, and you can't make decisions about who gets charged or how aggressively we pursue this. There's a fundamental conflict of interest that any defense attorney would exploit in about 30 seconds. Diane felt frustration bubble up, the same feeling she got when counsel procedures prevented her from acting on obvious injustice. "So what am I supposed to do? Wait while more drivers coordinate? While more passengers get targeted? Mrs. Dorothy Perkins is 78 years old and they're sharing her photo like she's on a wanted poster." "You're supposed to let me do my job," Williams said, not unkindly but firmly, which starts with securing evidence from that Facebook group before they realize they've been infiltrated. "How much access does Marcus have?" "He's in the main group, but there seems to be different tiers." Diane pulled out her phone, opening the screenshots Marcus had sent her during the drive over. "See these posts? They mention verified members who get access to additional information. Marcus can see the general feed, but not whatever the inner circle is sharing." Williams zoomed in on one particular comment. "Meeting tonight? Rosie's Bar? Verify status required." He looked up. These meetings are how they maintain operational security. Face-to-face coordination that doesn't leave digital evidence. Smart, actually. Old-school police tactics applied to civilian discrimination. The admin is someone with the username Tom's Detroit PD, Diane said, watching Williams's expression shift slightly. I'm guessing that's Tom Sullivan Sr., Jake's father. He retired from Detroit PD 3 years ago. Tom Sullivan. Williams typed the name into his computer, pulling up a file that made him go very still. Sergeant Thomas Sullivan, retired 2022 after 30 years on the force. 47 excessive force complaints during his career, only 6 resulted in discipline. Taught at the police academy for 12 years. He looked up. Did you know he was training recruits? I know his name appears in a lot of places it shouldn't, Diane said carefully. When I reviewed use of force cases during my first year on the committee, Sullivan's name kept showing up as the supervising officer in incidents that resulted in settlements. Williams made a note. Supervising officer means he was training younger cops on the street, teaching them his methods, his worldview. He scrolled through Sullivan's file. He took early retirement right after the George Floyd protests, when departments were under pressure to review officers with complaint patterns. Smart move. Pension intact. No formal accountability. And now he's training Uber drivers instead of police officers, Diane said, seeing the pattern complete itself. Same tactics, same targets, just a different uniform. Not a uniform. That's what makes this interesting from a prosecution standpoint. Williams closed the file and looked at Diane with assessment in his eyes. Councilwoman, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Can you be objective about this case? Diane knew the question behind the question. Could she separate personal violation from professional duty? Could she accept limitations on her involvement? Could she let go of control over something that had happened to her? Agent Williams, I spent 8 years as a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division before I went into politics. I know what objective investigation looks like, and I know when I'm too close to a case to see it clearly. I'm not asking to lead this. I'm asking to help in ways that don't compromise prosecution. Help how? Williams's tone suggested he already knew what she was about to propose and was preparing to reject it. That meeting tonight at Rosie's bar, someone needs to be there recording what they say, documenting who attends, gathering evidence of coordination. Diane pulled up the Facebook post again. Marcus can't go. He's 16. You can't go. They'd make you immediately. But I could. Absolutely not. Williams's response was immediate and final. You're the most recognizable face in Detroit right now. Your video has 3 million views. You walk into a bar full of the drivers who are coordinating against passengers who look like you, and best case scenario is they immediately shut down and lawyer up. Worst case is violence. Then who? Diane's frustration leaked through despite her best efforts. Who can get into that meeting and document what they're planning? Williams was quiet for a moment, thinking. Do you know any drivers who might be sympathetic to your situation? Someone who's experienced discrimination themselves? Someone who could plausibly claim to be a new member looking for community? Diane thought immediately of the woman who'd driven her home last night, the one who'd recognized her from the video and mentioned her own son, drove for Uber. But before she could say anything, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She glanced at Williams, who nodded permission. Councilwoman Mitchell? The voice was male, mid-30s, with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time. My name is Jerome Williams. No relation to the agent you're probably sitting with right now, though I wish I had his badge for some of the rides I've dealt with. I saw your video last night and I need to tell you something. What happened to you? That's been happening to me for 6 years. Diane put the phone on speaker with Williams's quick gesture of approval. Mr. Williams, you're on speaker with FBI Special Agent Terrence Williams. Can you tell us what you mean? Jerome's laugh was bitter. I mean, I've been rated 1-star 47 times by passengers who got exactly the service they requested. I've been reported for unsafe driving on routes where I never broke a single traffic law. I've had passengers literally photograph my license and tell me they're sending it to their lawyer because a black driver shouldn't be in their neighborhood. His voice caught slightly. I lost gold status 3 months ago because my rating dropped below 4.7. You know what the difference was between my rides? White passengers in the suburbs rate me 5 stars. Black passengers rate me 5 stars. White passengers in the city rate me 1 star and file complaints every single time. Williams was already typing notes. Mr. Williams, have you reported these incidents to Uber? 47 times. Same as my 1-star ratings. Funny coincidence, right? Jerome's voice carried 6 years of accumulated frustration. Every time I submit a complaint, I get an automated response about how Uber takes discrimination seriously and they're investigating. Nothing ever happens. The passengers who file false complaints, they keep requesting rides. The drivers who genuinely discriminate, they keep driving. But my rating keeps dropping because the algorithm doesn't know the difference between bad service and racist passengers. Diane and Williams exchanged a look. Mr. Williams, Diane said carefully, there's a meeting tonight of drivers who may be coordinating these exact kinds of incidents. We need someone to attend and document what's discussed. Someone who can plausibly pose as a driver looking for community and support. Would you be willing to help? The silence stretched for 5 seconds. 10. Diane could hear Jerome breathing, could almost feel him weighing the risk against 6 years of injustice. You want me to wear a wire? Yes, Williams said simply. I want you to walk into that meeting, record everything said, and walk out safely. I'll brief you on what to look for, what questions to ask, and how to extract yourself if things get dangerous. But I need to be clear, Mr. Williams. These men are organized, they're defensive, and if they discover what you're doing, there could be consequences beyond losing your Uber account. Agent Williams, with all due respect, I've been living with consequences for 6 years. At least this time I'd be doing something about it instead of just absorbing it. Jerome's voice steadied with decision. When do we start? 3 hours later, Jerome Williams sat in a windowless room in the FBI field office while a tech specialist fitted him with recording equipment that looked nothing like the obvious wire from television shows. The device was smaller than a pencil eraser, embedded in the temple of a pair of normal-looking glasses that would capture both audio and video. The specialist, a woman named Chen who looked barely old enough to drink, worked with the efficient precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. The battery lasts 6 hours, but the meeting shouldn't run more than 2, Chen said, adjusting the glasses on Jerome's face. The recording starts when you tap the right temple twice, like this, she demonstrated. You'll feel a tiny vibration when it's active. Tap 3 times to stop recording. Everything uploads to our secure cloud in real time, so even if they discover the device and destroy it, we'll have the footage up to that moment. Jerome nodded, trying not to think about the implications of if they discover the device. Agent Williams had been clear about the risks. These weren't random individuals, they were men who'd been trained in tactics, surveillance, and threat assessment. Some of them were ex-cops like Jake Sullivan. Some of them had fathers like Tom Sullivan who'd spent decades teaching suspicion and identification. You're going in as Brad Cooper, Williams said, reviewing the fake profile Marcus had already created. New driver? Just started 3 weeks ago? Frustrated with difficult passengers and looking for community? Your story is you got 1-starred 6 times by passengers in Zone 7 and you're trying to figure out what you're doing wrong. That'll get them talking. And it gives you a reason to ask questions without seeming like you already have answers. Diane stood against the wall, her role in this operation limited to observer, and the frustration of being sidelined was written across her face. What if they ask him about me? About the video? Then I express sympathy for Jake Sullivan, Jerome said, his voice flat. I say what happened to him could happen to any of us, that passengers lie and drivers get blamed. I become one of them. He looked at Diane directly. Ma'am, I know that's going to be hard for you to hear, but if I'm going to get real evidence, I need to make them trust me, and that means saying things that go against everything I believe. I understand, Diane said, though her hands clenched slightly at her sides. Just remember that everything you record tonight could be the difference between justice and these men continuing to coordinate discrimination against hundreds of passengers. Thousands, Williams corrected quietly. If the pattern holds across cities, we're talking thousands of passengers being systematically denied service based on race. This Facebook group isn't unique. We've identified similar networks in Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Los Angeles. What you document tonight helps us understand how they organize, how they recruit, and how we dismantle all of them. Jerome stood, adjusting the glasses one final time. They felt foreign on his face, heavier than normal glasses, despite Chen's assurance they weighed the same. What happens if Tom Sullivan is there? If he recognizes me from somewhere? You've never met Tom Sullivan, Williams said with certainty. I checked. Different precincts, different neighborhoods. You're clean. But if you feel unsafe at any point, if you think you've been made, you leave immediately. Tap the glasses 3 times to stop recording. Walk out the front door and call the number I gave you. We'll have units nearby, but not close enough to compromise your cover. Jerome nodded, trying to project confidence he didn't quite feel. He thought about his mother, who'd worked 3 jobs to put him through community college. He thought about his nephew, who wanted to be a lawyer someday and looked up to Jerome despite his uncle's struggles. He thought about every passenger who'd rated him 1 star, not for his driving, but for his skin, and every driver who'd coordinated to make sure those passengers couldn't get rides from anyone. Let's go, Jerome said, and walked toward a meeting that would either expose a conspiracy or end his career in ways he couldn't quite let himself imagine. Rosie's bar sat on the edge of Hamtramck, the kind of neighborhood dive that had survived Detroit's hardest decades by being exactly what its regulars needed and nothing more. Neon beer signs glowed in windows that hadn't been cleaned in a decade, and the parking lot was more pothole than pavement. Jerome pulled his Honda Civic into a spot between 2 pickup trucks with thin blue line stickers, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the cold November air. He tapped the right temple of his glasses twice. The tiny vibration confirmed the recording had started, and somewhere in a surveillance van 3 blocks away, FBI techs were watching his field of vision appear on their monitors. Agent Williams had been clear about the protocol. Document everything. Don't push too hard. Get out at the first sign of danger. Jerome repeated those instructions to himself like a prayer as he walked toward the bar's entrance, hearing voices inside already raised in conversation that sounded more like strategy session than happy hour. The door opened to a wall of noise and the smell of beer and fried food. 47 men packed into a space meant for maybe 30, clustered around tables that had been pushed together to form a conference-style setup. Most were white, ranging from mid-20s to late 50s, wearing everything from Carhartt jackets to business casual button-downs. Some Jerome recognized from profile pictures in the Facebook group. Others were new faces, drivers who'd apparently kept their discrimination offline until gathering in person felt safe enough to speak freely. Jake Sullivan stood near the front, his posture defensive despite the supportive crowd. He looked like someone who'd aged 5 years in 24 hours, his eyes red-rimmed and his hands never quite still. But it was the man next to him who commanded the room's attention. Tom Sullivan Sr. stood with the easy authority of someone who'd spent 3 decades telling people what to do and having them obey without question. He wore his old Detroit PD jacket like armor, and when he spoke, the room quieted immediately. "Thanks for coming," Tom said, his voice carrying that particular cadence of a practiced public speaker. "I know some of you drove an hour to get here, and I know you're all nervous about what happened to Jake. But that's exactly why we need to talk. What happened to my son isn't just his problem. It's everyone's problem. Because if they can crucify him for protecting himself, they can do it to any of us. The room murmured agreement, a chorus of, "That's right," and "damn straight," that made Jerome's stomach tighten. He found an empty spot against the back wall, positioning himself where his glasses could capture the widest possible view. A driver standing next to him, mid-40s with a beer gut and a tiger's cap, leaned over with the familiarity of assumed alliance. "First meeting?" Tiger's cap asked. Jerome nodded. "Yeah, just started driving 3 weeks ago. Got 6 one-star ratings already, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing wrong." "You're not doing anything wrong, brother. The system's rigged." Tiger's cap extended his hand. "Mike D., I'm the one who posted about Zone 7 auto cancels. That advice saved my rating." Jerome shook his hand, trying not to think about how that advice had probably stranded dozens of passengers who looked like him. "Brad Cooper. Appreciate the tips, man. This is all new to me." Tom Sullivan's voice cut through the side conversations. "All right, everyone, let's get started. First order of business, Jake's situation." He gestured at his son, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "As you all know, Jake encountered a passenger last night who claimed to be Councilwoman Mitchell. He followed proper protocol, detained a suspicious individual until authorities could verify identity. The fact that she turned out to actually be who she claimed doesn't change the validity of his response." A driver near the front raised his hand. "But Tom," he live-streamed it. "That's evidence they can use against him." "Evidence of what? Doing the right thing?" Tom's voice sharpened. "That video shows a driver concerned about fraud protecting himself and other drivers. The only reason it looks bad is because the media and activists have spun it as racism. But we all know what this really is. This is about control. This is about them making sure we're too afraid to protect ourselves." Jerome felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral. The glasses were recording every word, every face, every gesture of agreement rippling through the room. "Speaking of protection," Tom continued, "let's talk strategy. The Mitchell situation has made it clear we need to be more careful about how we coordinate. The Facebook group is useful, but it's also vulnerable. Anyone can request to join. Anyone can screenshot posts. So tonight we're going to establish some new protocols." He pulled out a laptop and connected it to a projector someone had set up on the bar's back wall. The image that appeared made Jerome's blood run cold. It was a map of Detroit, divided into colored zones like a military operation. Red zones covered the entire east side, the neighborhoods around 8 Mile, parts of southwest Detroit. Yellow zones marked transitional areas. Green zones highlighted the suburbs and affluent neighborhoods like Palmer Woods. "Everyone see this?" Tom gestured at the map with a laser pointer. "These are the zones we discussed in the Facebook group, but now we're making it official protocol. Red zones are high risk. That means you cancel rides from these areas whenever possible. If you can't cancel without hurting your acceptance rating, you accept, but you keep the app open, doors locked, and you document everything in case the passenger files false complaints later." A younger driver, maybe 25, spoke up from the middle of the room. "How do you define high risk exactly? Just so I'm clear on what we're looking for." Jerome watched Tom's face shift slightly, saw him weighing how explicitly to answer. The room had gone quiet, everyone waiting for the leadership to say what they were all thinking but hadn't quite articulated. "Look," Tom said, and Jerome could hear Agent Williams's voice in his head saying, "This is it. This is when they drop the pretense. We're all adults here. We all know patterns. High risk means neighborhoods where you're statistically more likely to encounter problem passengers. Where you're more likely to get false complaints, low ratings, safety issues. Everyone in this room knows exactly which neighborhoods I'm talking about." "Certain demographics," someone muttered, and nervous laughter rippled through the group. "I didn't say that," Tom responded, but his smile suggested he didn't need to. "But since we're being honest, let me share something. I was a cop for 30 years. I worked these streets. I know patterns. And the pattern is clear. Certain areas generate disproportionate problems. That's not racism. That's statistics. That's reality. Jerome forced himself to stay still, to keep his breathing even, to not react to hearing his existence categorized as a statistical problem. The glasses captured everything, Tom's face filling the frame as he warmed to his subject. The media wants to make this about race, Tom continued. They want to call us racist for acknowledging reality, but we're not discriminating. We're prioritizing. We're protecting ourselves and our livelihoods from passengers who weaponize ratings and complaints. A driver Jerome hadn't seen before stood up, a woman in her 40s with the kind of entitled energy that suggested she'd never been told no in her life. "I've created something that might help," she said, pulling out her own laptop. "A shared spreadsheet, passenger names, photos, addresses. If they're on the list, you auto-decline. No questions asked." The image on the projector changed, and Jerome felt his hand twitch toward his phone, before remembering the FBI was recording everything. It was a Google spreadsheet with hundreds of rows. Names, photos that had clearly been taken without consent, home addresses, and in the notes column, warnings. Always complains. Threatens to report. One starred me for nothing. Jerome recognized Mrs. Dorothy Perkins's photo in the third row. "This is smart," Tom said, examining the spreadsheet. "But it's also risky if it gets out. We need to keep this among verified members only. How many people have access?" "Just the 89 verified drivers," the woman replied. "The ones who've proven they understand what we're doing here." "Good. Keep it that way." Tom turned back to the room. "Now, about verification. Some of you are already verified, but for new members like—" He glanced at Jerome's direction. "What was your name, friend?" "Brad Cooper," Jerome said, keeping his voice steady. "Brad, welcome. To become verified, you need to show you're committed to this community. That means documenting your problem rides, sharing your experiences, and most importantly, following the protocols we establish. Zone maps, passenger lists, coordinated responses." Tom's eyes swept the room. "The Mitchell woman is going to come after us now. She's got the FBI involved, probably. She's going to try to paint this as organized discrimination. So we need to be smart, we need to be unified, and we need to have each other's backs." A driver near the front, someone Jerome recognized from the Facebook group as a frequent poster, raised his hand. "Tom, what about the legal exposure? If they start investigating, couldn't they subpoena the Facebook group, the spreadsheet, everything?" Tom smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd thought several steps ahead. "That's where my friends in the department come in handy. I still have 3 active-duty officers who feed me information. They run background checks on problem passengers, they alert me to investigations, they make sure we stay one step ahead of any official scrutiny." The room went completely silent. Jerome felt his pulse spike as he realized what he'd just heard. This wasn't just civilian discrimination. This was police officers actively participating in a conspiracy, using official databases for private coordination. This was federal crimes stacking on top of federal crimes. "Wait," Jerome heard himself say before he could stop himself. "You have cops helping you?" Tom looked at him, and Jerome saw the assessment happening in real time. "I have patriots helping me, Brad. Officers who understand that the real threat to public safety isn't drivers protecting themselves. It's activists like Mitchell trying to defund police and destroy the systems that keep cities safe." He paused. "You got a problem with that?" Jerome forced himself to shake his head. "No, sir. Just making sure I understand how deep the support network goes." "It goes all the way to the foundation," Tom said. "That's what makes us strong. Now, any other questions before we—" A driver in the middle of the room, someone Jerome recognized from one of the profile pictures, suddenly pointed at him. "Wait, I've seen you before. You were at the city council hearing last month. You testified about rating discrimination." The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Every face turned toward Jerome, and he felt the walls closing in with the particular horror of knowing he'd been made. Tom's expression shifted from welcoming to dangerous in the span of a single breath. "Is that true, Brad?" Tom's voice was soft, almost gentle, which made it more threatening. "Were you at a city council hearing?" Jerome's mind raced through possibilities. Deny it and risk being called a liar when they could easily verify. Admit it and try to spin it as research, run and confirm their suspicions. He chose the only option that might buy him seconds. "Yeah, I was there. I was trying to understand the system before I started driving. Figured I'd learn from other drivers' experiences." "Interesting," Tom said, walking slowly toward Jerome's position against the back wall. "Because Brad Cooper isn't a real driver, is he? I checked the driver database this afternoon when I saw your join request. No Brad Cooper registered in Detroit. No Brad Cooper in the system at all." Jerome's hand moved toward his phone in his pocket, but two drivers had already positioned themselves between him and the door. Tiger's Cap, who'd been so friendly minutes ago, grabbed Jerome's arm with surprising strength. "Let me see that phone," Tom said, his cop training evident in the command tone. "And those glasses. Right now." Jerome yanked his arm free from Tiger's Cap and bolted for the door, but there were too many bodies between him and freedom. Hands grabbed at his jacket, his shirt. Someone's fist connected with his ribs. He twisted hard, breaking free long enough to crash through a cluster of drivers near the entrance. His glasses flew off his face, clattering to the floor where someone's boot immediately crushed them under heel. "Get him!" Tom's voice roared behind him, and Jerome burst through the door into the parking lot, running for his car with the sound of footsteps and shouting following close behind. He fumbled his keys, dropped them, scooped them up with shaking hands, and threw himself into the driver's seat. The engine started on the second try, and he reversed out of the spot with three drivers pounding on his windows. Jerome floored the accelerator, his Honda fishtailing out of the parking lot and onto the street. In his rearview mirror, he could see Tom Sullivan standing in the bar's doorway, phone already to his ear, probably calling those police contacts he'd bragged about. 3 blocks away, in the surveillance van, Agent Williams watched Jerome's panicked driving on the GPS tracker and spoke into his radio. "All units, target is heading east on Joseph Campow. Do not intercept. I repeat, do not intercept. Let him clear the area." He turned to the tech specialist sitting next to him. "Please tell me you got everything before they destroyed the glasses." Chen didn't look up from her screen, where Jerome's recorded footage was playing in perfect high-definition clarity. Tom Sullivan's face filled the frame, saying, "I still have 3 active-duty officers who feed me information." The audio was crystal clear, the video damning, the conspiracy exposed in their own words. "We got it all," Chen said quietly. "Every word, every face, the map, the spreadsheet, the police connections. This is enough for RICO charges against all 47 drivers, plus the 3 cops Sullivan mentioned." Williams allowed himself a small smile. "Then let's make some calls. Starting with those 3 officers Sullivan just implicated in conspiracy to commit civil rights violations." Back at Diane's house, Marcus sat at his laptop in his bedroom, headphones on, editing software open, working on something he'd started before Jerome had even walked into that bar. He'd spent the past 6 hours cutting together footage, writing script, recording voiceover, building something that felt more important than any school project he'd ever attempted. His phone buzzed with a text from his mom. "Jerome got the evidence. FBI has everything. Come downstairs." But Marcus didn't move yet. He had 43 seconds left to render, 43 seconds until his response video was ready to upload. The title card appeared on his preview screen. "My mother was kidnapped." Here's what happened next. His finger hovered over the publish button as the render bar hit 100%. He clicked publish and watched the video go live to his 3,200 YouTube subscribers. Then he went downstairs to tell his mother that whatever the FBI had captured tonight The court of public opinion was about to deliver its own verdict. The video counter on Marcus's laptop climbed with hypnotic speed. 100 views. 500, 2,000. He'd uploaded, "My mother was kidnapped. Here's what happened next," at 9:47 p.m., expecting maybe his classmates and some local viewers to watch overnight. By 10:15 p.m., when he finally went downstairs to join his family, the count had hit 100,000 and showed no signs of slowing. Diane sat at the kitchen table with Keisha and Amber. Agent Williams on speakerphone delivering the good news about Jerome's successful recording and the bad news about how close it had come to disaster. Jerome had made it back to the FBI field office shaken but unhurt, and the tech team was already transcribing every word Tom Sullivan had said about police connections and coordinated discrimination. But Diane's attention kept drifting to Marcus's phone, which he'd left on the counter, notifications pinging every few seconds with comments, shares, and reactions. "Ma'am, are you listening?" Williams's voice carried gentle concern through the speaker. "This is significant evidence. We have Tom Sullivan on tape admitting to conspiracy, we have visual documentation of the spreadsheet with passenger photos, and we have him explicitly stating that active duty officers are feeding him information. That's conspiracy to deprive civil rights under color of authority. That's misuse of law enforcement databases. That's enough for federal RICO charges against all 47 drivers, plus the 3 officers he mentioned." "I'm listening," Diane said, though her eyes were on Marcus's phone screen, watching the view count roll over to 500,000. "What about Jake Sullivan specifically? What charges is he facing?" Williams paused long enough that Diane knew she wasn't going to like the answer. "That's complicated. Jake committed false imprisonment and potentially kidnapping, but he's also our best witness against his father and the police connections. If he cooperates fully, testifies against Tom Sullivan, and names the 3 officers, the federal prosecutor is considering immunity in exchange for testimony." "Immunity!" Diane's voice came out flat and hard. "He kidnapped me on camera, broadcast it to millions of people, and he walks free because his father ran a bigger conspiracy?" "Not free," Williams corrected. "Community service, mandatory bias therapy, speaking engagements at police academies statewide about confronting prejudice. But yes, no prison time. And councilwoman, I need you to understand something. Without Jake's cooperation, we can charge Tom Sullivan with conspiracy, but we can't identify the 3 officers. Tom's smart enough not to have used their names on that recording. Jake is the only one who can give us those names, and those officers accessing police databases for a discrimination network is the piece that elevates this from local problem to federal reform case." Diane closed her eyes, feeling the weight of imperfect justice settling on her shoulders. This was the reality she'd known as a prosecutor, the compromises required to dismantle larger systems. One man's freedom in exchange for exposing institutional rot. It made tactical sense. It made her want to put her fist through the kitchen table. "Mom," Marcus said quietly from the doorway, "you need to see this." He brought his laptop over, turned it so everyone could see the screen. The view count had hit 1 million. Comments scrolled past faster than anyone could read them, but Marcus had the top comments filtered. "This young man gets it better than most adults. Everyone watch this. This is how you tell truth to power. I'm a white driver, and I just left that Facebook group because of this video. Marcus Mitchell for president when he's old enough." The video Marcus had created wasn't just a response to his mother's kidnapping. It was a masterclass in persuasive storytelling that would be studied in media courses for years to come. He'd structured it in 5 parts, each one building on the last with the careful pacing of someone who'd grown up consuming viral content and understood exactly how to craft it. Part 1 showed Diane as Marcus's mother, not the councilwoman. Clips of her making breakfast, helping with homework, attending his robotics club competitions. Marcus's voiceover, "This is my mom, not the politician you see on TV, my mom. The woman who worked 20 years driving a city bus so she could afford night law school. The woman who still volunteers at soup kitchens every Saturday. The woman who taught me that dignity isn't something you demand, it's something you never let anyone take. Part 2 showed Jake Sullivan's live stream footage in its entirety, but Marcus had added frame-by-frame analysis. He paused on Jake's face, zooming in. Watch his expression. He's not scared. He's not uncertain. He's enjoying this. He's enjoying the power of locking someone in his car and controlling their story. Cut to the view count, climbing in real time during the original stream. 89,000 people watched my mother trapped and couldn't help her. That's not a glitch. That's how the system works. Part 3 presented the Facebook group screenshots Marcus had gathered, the maps, the coded language, Mrs. Dorothy Perkins's photo. This wasn't random. This was organized. 247 drivers coordinating to deny service to passengers who look like my mother, like my grandmother, like me. He showed the spreadsheet of targeted passengers, their faces visible, their addresses exposed, their dignity violated. They didn't just discriminate. They documented it. They shared it. They celebrated it. Part 4 was where Marcus's voice broke slightly, showing the cost. He read comments from Jake's original live stream aloud. She looks guilty. Welfare fraud. These people always play the victim. Then Marcus looked directly into the camera, his teenage face showing exhaustion beyond his years. These people. My mother has a PhD in educational policy. She drives a hybrid because she believes in climate justice. She volunteers at 3 different community organizations. And to Jake Sullivan and his friends, she's these people. If this happened to a city councilwoman with resources and connections, what happens to everyone else? What happens to my grandmother when she needs a ride to church? What happens to my friend's mom who cleans offices downtown? What happens to you? Part 5 was the call to action. But Marcus delivered it with the particular authenticity that only a 16-year-old who'd watched his mother suffer could manage. Justice for Diane Mitchell isn't enough. We need justice for everyone. Share this video. Tag your representatives. Demand accountability. Because if we don't, this just happens again tomorrow to someone who doesn't have a son with a laptop and the rage to speak up. The video ended on Diane hugging Marcus outside their house the night of the incident, a moment captured by a neighbor's doorbell camera and shared with permission. No words, just a mother and son holding on to each other while the world watched. 5 million views, Keisha said quietly, watching the counter climb past the milestone in real time. Marcus, this is the most watched YouTube video in Detroit history. Agent Williams's voice came through the speaker, impressed despite himself. That video just became evidence in our case. It's going to influence public opinion in ways that help pressure for reform. But Councilwoman Mitchell, there's something else you need to know. The City Council is calling an emergency session tomorrow morning. Word is they're going to force a vote on your committee chairmanship. Diane's head snapped up. What? Councilman Edwards has been making calls all evening. He's arguing that your involvement in this incident creates an insurmountable conflict of interest, that you can't objectively oversee public safety regulations when you're the victim of a crime committed by someone those regulations affect. Williams's voice carried sympathy. He has the votes, ma'am. I'm sorry. The kitchen went silent except for the constant ping of notifications on Marcus's phone. Diane felt the particular numbness that came from being punished for being victimized, the circular logic that blamed her for the attention her assault had generated. She'd spent 20 years building credibility, 6 years on the city council fighting for accountability, and now she was about to lose her committee chairmanship because a man had decided she was too black to be who she claimed. So I get kidnapped on camera, Diane said slowly. The video goes viral. A federal investigation uncovers massive conspiracy, and I'm the one who loses my position. That's the message we're sending? That victims should shut up and accept it? Or face professional consequences? That's exactly the message Edwards wants to send, Keisha said, her law school training evident in the precision of her analysis. He's been looking for a reason to remove you since you started pushing police accountability measures. This incident gave him cover to do it while claiming conflict of interest instead of political retaliation. Amber was reading something on her laptop, her face showing growing anger. Mom, there's already a petition going around supporting Edwards' motion. 1,500 signatures so far. The narrative is that you're using this incident to push a political agenda, that you're exploiting tragedy for power. Diane thought about the 78-year-old woman in the church dress, photographed without consent and marked for denial of service. She thought about Jerome Williams, who'd spent 6 years absorbing discrimination until tonight, when he'd finally had the chance to fight back. She thought about the 847 passengers whose complaints had been buried by companies that profited from ignoring problems. And she thought about Marcus, 16 years old, using his voice to demand justice because his mother had been silenced in the back of a car. Something shifted in Diane's chest, a realignment of perspective that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. They wanted her to feel defeated, to accept removal as punishment for being a victim, to fade quietly into the background while they rebuilt the systems that had failed. Agent Williams, Diane said, her voice carrying new steel. When is the federal prosecutor filing charges? 3 to 5 days. We need to verify the officer identities, build the conspiracy case, coordinate with the Attorney General's office. Why? Because I'm going to that city council meeting tomorrow and I'm not going to fight to keep my committee chair. Diane stood, feeling clarity settle over her like armor. I'm going to tell them I'm stepping down. Mom, no, Marcus protested. You can't let them win. I'm not letting them win, baby. I'm changing the game. Diane looked at her children, at the laptop showing 5 million people watching Marcus's video, at the phone still pinging with notifications that meant the world was paying attention in ways it hadn't, before her humiliation went viral. Edwards wants me off the Public Safety Committee because he thinks it neutralizes me. But being on one committee limits me to one area of oversight. What if instead of chairing public safety, I ran the entire city? The kitchen went completely silent. Keisha's mouth opened slightly. Amber stopped scrolling. Agent Williams's voice came through the speaker with careful neutrality. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I'm going to announce my candidacy for mayor of Detroit tomorrow morning, right before they vote to remove me from the committee. Diane felt the pieces clicking into place, the strategy that transformed weakness into weapon. They want to make this about conflict of interest. Fine, I'll step down from oversight of one department so I can oversee the entire municipal government. They want to paint me as a victim? I'll show them what happens when victims stop accepting what's been done to them and start architecting what comes next. Marcus's face split into a grin that reminded Diane of his father. Gone now for 3 years, but still present in his son's fierce joy at witnessing justice take unexpected forms. That's the most badass thing I've ever heard you say. Language, Diane corrected automatically, but she was smiling too. Agent Williams, I need to know what evidence you'll be making public and when. I can't coordinate my campaign around your investigation, but I need to know the timeline so I'm not blindsided. The charges will be filed within a week, Williams confirmed. Federal RICO conspiracy against Tom Sullivan and the 47 drivers, misuse of law enforcement database charges against the 3 officers once Jake identifies them. And Councilwoman, there's one more thing. We found the source of the shared spreadsheet. It's been updated 1,847 times with passenger information. We're working with Uber and Lyft to identify all the passengers whose data was shared, and we're recommending a class action civil rights lawsuit against both the drivers and the companies that enabled this by burying complaints. 1,847 passengers. Nearly 2,000 people whose information had been weaponized against them, whose faces had been shared without consent, whose right to public accommodation had been systematically denied. The scope kept expanding, and with it, the stakes of what Diane was about to attempt. "Mom," Keisha said carefully, "running for mayor 3 days after being kidnapped on camera is going to generate massive scrutiny. Every decision you make, every policy you propose, people will say you're biased by trauma. Edwards will say you're exploiting tragedy for political gain." "Are you ready for that?" Diane thought about Jake Sullivan, who would testify against his father and receive immunity. About Tom Sullivan, who'd spent 30 years training officers in suspicion and would spend the next decade in federal prison. About Jerome Williams, who'd risked his safety to expose a conspiracy. About Marcus, who'd turned his rage into a video that 5 million people had watched and shared. About Mrs. Dorothy Perkins, who just wanted to get to church on Sunday without being photographed and marked as undesirable. "I spent 20 years driving a bus through every neighborhood in Detroit," Diane said quietly. "I saw redlining, I saw discrimination. I saw the system fail people who looked like me every single day. This ride with Jake Sullivan didn't teach me anything new about how the system works. It just showed me on camera what I've always known. And if 5 million people watched Marcus's video, then 5 million people are ready to hear what needs to change." She looked at her daughters and son. "I'm not running on a viral video. I'm running on 20 years of understanding exactly what's broken and how to fix it." Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it, reading the message twice before the implications fully registered. "This is Jake Sullivan. Agent Williams gave me your number. I know you probably never want to hear from me again, but I want you to know I'm cooperating fully. I'll testify against my father. I'll name the 3 officers. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, even though I know it won't be enough. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover what I did to you, but it's where I have to start." Diane stared at the message, feeling the complexity of justice settle over her. Jake Sullivan would walk free while his father went to prison. He'd speak at police academies about bias, while the passengers he'd profiled would live with the memory of being suspected. He'd get therapy and community service, while she'd lost her committee chairmanship and become a symbol of violation to millions of viewers. The math didn't balance. It never would. But maybe that was the point Marcus had been trying to make in his video. Justice wasn't about perfect balance. It was about forward momentum, about dismantling systems one testimony at a time, about victims refusing to stay silent even when the resolution wouldn't heal what had been broken. Diane didn't respond to Jake's text. She might someday, might even accept his apology as genuine, but tonight wasn't that night. Tonight was for preparing to walk into a city council chamber tomorrow and transform her greatest humiliation into the foundation of something larger than revenge. Tonight was for calling campaign managers and policy advisors and community organizers and telling them Detroit was about to see the first mayoral candidate who'd announced her platform from the back seat of an Uber. "Keisha, start drafting talking points," Diane said, her voice carrying the command tone she'd learned during 20 years of managing bus routes and 6 years of managing council sessions. "Amber, reach out to community organizations and let them know I'll be making an announcement tomorrow. Marcus, make sure your video has proper closed captions for accessibility and add a link to voter registration sites in the description." "What are you going to do, Mom?" Marcus asked. Diane looked at the viral video still playing on his laptop, at the view counter pushing toward 6 million, at the comments section where thousands of strangers were having conversations about justice and discrimination and what it meant to stand up when systems tried to keep you down. "I'm going to write a speech," she said, And then I'm going to show Councilman Edwards what happens when you try to silence someone who's spent their entire life learning how to speak louder. The city council chambers felt different at 9 a.m. the next morning. The gallery that usually held maybe 30 citizens for routine sessions was packed with over 400 people, standing room only, with news cameras lining the back wall like sentries documenting history. Diane walked through the side entrance in her navy suit, the same one she'd worn 2 days ago when this all started, now pressed and professional, despite the wrinkles that had told a different story. Every head turned as she entered, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat fields. Councilman Edwards sat at his position 3 seats down from the chair, his expression showing the particular satisfaction of someone who believed he'd already won. He'd spent the previous evening securing votes, calling in favors, building the coalition that would remove Diane from her committee chairmanship with what he considered appropriate political cover. Conflict of interest, he'd told reporters waiting outside. Not retaliation, just necessary recusal given her personal involvement in an ongoing criminal case. The fact that Diane was the victim, not the perpetrator, seemed irrelevant to his logic. Mayor Bradford gavelled the session to order, his 70-year-old face showing none of the political calculation that had kept him in office for 3 terms. We have several emergency items on today's agenda, but first, Councilman Edwards has requested an immediate vote regarding Councilwoman Mitchell's position as chair of the Public Safety Committee. Edwards stood, straightening his tie with the confidence of someone who'd counted votes twice and knew the outcome. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we all know, Councilwoman Mitchell was the victim of a serious crime 2 nights ago, a crime that has since generated national attention and sparked federal investigations into ride-share services. While we all sympathize with what she experienced, her involvement as a direct victim creates an insurmountable conflict of interest when it comes to regulating the very industry that failed to protect her. He paused, making eye contact with gallery observers who'd signed his petition. Public safety oversight requires objectivity, distance, and the ability to make decisions based on policy rather than personal experience. Councilwoman Mitchell can no longer provide that objectivity. Therefore, I move that she be removed as committee chair effective immediately, with a replacement to be nominated by this body within 30 days. Several council members nodded. Councilwoman Torres looked stricken but didn't speak. The mayor prepared to call for discussion before the vote. But Diane raised her hand, the gesture calm and deliberate. Mr. Mayor, if I may address the council before the vote? Bradford hesitated, probably calculating the optics of silencing her versus giving her a platform. The floor recognizes Councilwoman Mitchell. Diane stood, and the gallery went absolutely silent. Even the news cameras seemed to focus more intently, sensing something significant about to happen. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. The speech she'd written at 2 a.m. that morning was burned into her memory with the clarity that came from rage transformed into purpose. Councilman Edwards is right about one thing, Diane began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed chamber. I am the victim of a serious crime. 2 nights ago, Jake Sullivan locked me in his car, live-streamed my detention to 89,000 viewers, and called the police to report me as a fraud. He did this because when he looked at a black woman giving him a Palmer Woods address, his first assumption wasn't that I might actually live there. His first assumption was crime. She let that word hang in the air for 3 seconds. And Councilman Edwards is also right that I can no longer be objective about the rideshare industry. How could I be? I've seen firsthand how a driver can decide you're guilty based on nothing but your appearance, how a live stream can become public humiliation, how 89,000 strangers can watch your powerlessness and call it entertainment. I've lost my objectivity because I've gained something more valuable. I've gained understanding. Edwards shifted in his seat, sensing the trap but unable to see its shape yet. But understanding doesn't qualify you to regulate the industry that victimized you. That's precisely why. I'm not finished, Councilman. Diane's voice carried steel now. You're right that I shouldn't chair the Public Safety Committee anymore. In fact, I agree with you so completely that I'm going to save you the vote. She turned to address the entire council, but her eyes settled on Mayor Bradford. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as chair of the Public Safety Committee. The gallery erupted in confused murmurs. Edwards looked surprised, but pleased. Torres looked devastated. The mayor leaned forward, his political instincts sensing this wasn't the surrender it appeared to be. However, Diane continued, her voice rising above the noise, I'm not resigning because I'm compromised by victimization. I'm resigning because chairing one committee limits me to overseeing one department, one set of policies, one area of municipal governance. And what happened to me 2 nights ago isn't a Public Safety Committee problem. It's a citywide problem. It's a systemic problem. It's a problem that requires someone willing to rebuild broken systems from the foundation up. She paused, letting the gallery quiet down, letting the cameras focus, letting the moment crystallize. So I'm stepping down from the Public Safety Committee to announce my candidacy for mayor of Detroit. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds before the gallery exploded. Half the room erupted in applause. The other half sat stunned. News cameras swung toward Diane with the hungry attention of predators who'd just spotted unprecedented prey. Edwards's face cycled through confusion, anger, and dawning realization that he'd been outmaneuvered so completely it would be taught in political science courses. Mayor Bradford's gavel came down hard, trying to restore order, but Diane wasn't finished. Councilman Edwards suggested I lack objectivity. He's right. I'm not objective about discrimination. I'm not objective about systems that protect men who kidnap councilwomen on camera. I'm not objective about police officers who access databases illegally to help drivers coordinate denial of service to black passengers. That last line made several council members sit up straighter. The FBI investigation wasn't public yet, but Diane had just confirmed its existence and scope. Edwards looked like he wanted to object but couldn't figure out on what grounds, without revealing he knew more than he should. I spent 20 years driving a Detroit City bus, Diane continued, her voice carrying the weight of those decades. Every day, I drove through neighborhoods that Councilman Edwards probably couldn't find on a map. I picked up passengers who were late for work because previous drivers had canceled on them. I saw mothers miss doctor's appointments because they couldn't get rides. I watched this city fail the people who built it, and I promised myself that if I ever had the power to change that, I would. She looked directly at Edwards now. So thank you, Councilman, for trying to remove me from a position where I could make small changes. You've motivated me to pursue a position where I can make transformational ones. Detroit deserves a mayor who understands what it means to be denied service, who knows what it feels like to be suspected of crimes you didn't commit, who's been locked in a system designed to keep certain people powerless. The gallery was on its feet now, half applauding, half arguing, all of them witnessing a political moment that would define Detroit's next election cycle. Diane gathered her briefcase and walked toward the exit, but not before delivering one final line that news outlets would replay for days. Councilman Edwards, you wanted me to know my place. I do. My place is running this city, and I'm just getting started. The council chamber dissolved into chaos behind her as Diane walked out to a hallway packed with reporters, cameras, and citizens who'd watched Marcus's video and come to see what justice looked like in real time. She stopped for exactly 3 questions before her daughters guided her through the crowd to a waiting car. But one question cut through the noise with particular force. Councilwoman Mitchell, Jake Sullivan is cooperating with the FBI and receiving immunity. How do you feel about the man who kidnapped you walking free? Diane stopped, turned to face the reporter, and gave the answer she'd practiced at 3 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. Justice isn't about perfect outcomes. It's about forward progress. Jake Sullivan's testimony will help dismantle a network that victimized hundreds of passengers, will help identify police officers who betrayed their oaths, will help reform systems that have failed for decades. Do I wish he'd face prison time? Yes. But I also wish those 847 passengers who filed complaints had been heard before Jake Sullivan ever picked me up. Justice is choosing which imperfections we can live with to achieve changes we can't live without. The answer would be analyzed and criticized and praised in equal measure over the coming weeks. But in that moment, walking toward her car with her daughters beside her and Marcus filming everything for what would become part 2 of his viral series, Diane felt the particular exhaustion that came from turning personal violation into public purpose. She'd lost her committee chairmanship. She'd gained a mayoral campaign. The math didn't balance, but maybe that was the point. 3 weeks later, the federal charges dropped with the force of institutional reckoning. U.S. Attorney Sharon Lee stood before a podium in the McNamara Federal Building and announced RICO conspiracy charges against Thomas Sullivan Sr. and 46 drivers from Real Talk Rideshare Detroit. One driver had cooperated and received immunity in exchange for testimony. 3 Detroit police officers were charged with misuse of law enforcement databases and conspiracy to deprive civil rights. The officers' names were read aloud, each one carrying 30 years of service, commendations, and a record of complaints that had been dismissed as activist campaigns. Jake Sullivan testified for 6 hours in a closed hearing, identifying the 3 officers his father had boasted about, providing details of the shared spreadsheet's creation, explaining how Tom Sullivan had adapted police training tactics to civilian discrimination. He spoke about growing up in a house where certain neighborhoods were described as war zones, where certain demographics were framed as inherent threats, where suspicion was taught as survival. His voice broke twice during testimony. It didn't change what he'd done, but it explained where he'd learned to do it. Tom Sullivan Sr. was convicted on all counts after a 3-week trial. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. His sentencing hearing was brief and brutal. Federal Judge Harold Brennan, who'd seen 30 years of cases and thought he'd witnessed every permutation of institutional corruption, delivered a sentence that made national news. 8 years in federal prison, $500,000 in fines, permanent prohibition from law enforcement consultation, and mandatory educational programs about civil rights history. Tom had stood silent through the sentencing, refusing to look at Jake in the gallery. His final act of defiance was sending his son a letter that simply read, "You're dead to me." Jake completed 2,000 hours of community service with the Detroit Urban Bus Coalition, riding routes his father had warned him to avoid, meeting passengers his father had taught him to suspect. He underwent mandatory racial bias therapy every week for 18 months, learning to identify the patterns his father had hardwired into his thinking. He spoke at police academies across Michigan, telling his story as a cautionary tale about inherited prejudice and the cost of unexamined assumptions. Some cadets listened, some walked out. Jake kept speaking. The 847 passengers whose information had been shared in that spreadsheet received letters from the FBI offering to connect them with attorneys handling a class action lawsuit against both the driver network and the rideshare companies. The lawsuit settled for $12 million 18 months later. Uber and Lyft paid the money but admitted no wrongdoing in official statements, claiming they couldn't have known about coordination happening outside their platforms. Reform advocates called it a start. Victims called it insufficient. Both were right. Mrs. Dorothy Perkins received $15,000 from the settlement and used it to buy a used Toyota Camry so she'd never need to request a ride again. She still attended Diane's campaign rallies every week, sitting in the front row with her church hat and her purse held in both hands, a visible reminder of who the fight was for. Jerome Williams was promoted to lead driver for Detroit's new accessible transit program, a municipal initiative Diane had championed during her mayoral campaign. He still drove for Uber occasionally, but now he did it with the knowledge that his complaint wouldn't disappear into automated responses. The system hadn't been fixed, but it had been cracked open enough to let light in. Marcus Mitchell's response video ended up with 18 million views across platforms. He received admission offers from film schools he hadn't even applied to, invitations to speak at media conferences, and a profile in Rolling Stone titled "The Teen Who Made Justice Go Viral." He turned down most of the attention, focusing instead on documenting his mother's mayoral campaign for a follow-up video he'd released the week before the election. 6 months after that night in the 7-Eleven parking lot, Diane Mitchell stood on a debate stage across from Mayor Bradford and delivered an answer about rideshare regulation that every news outlet would replay. Bradford had just finished explaining his 30 years of experience building Detroit's economy, bringing jobs to the city, maintaining stability through crisis. Then the moderator turned to Diane. "Councilwoman Mitchell, your campaign is built on personal experience with discrimination. Mayor Bradford argues that governance requires experience, not symbolism. Your response?" Diane looked directly into the camera, knowing Marcus was watching from the audience, knowing Jerome was watching from his living room, knowing somewhere Jake Sullivan was watching from a mandatory bias training session. Mayor Bradford built a city where 847 passengers were systematically denied service because of their skin color, where police officers sold database access to discrimination networks, where a city councilwoman could be kidnapped on camera and the first question wasn't about the kidnapper's accountability, but about the victim's objectivity. She paused, let the silence emphasize what came next. "I'm not running on a viral video, Mayor Bradford. I'm running on the fact that when I was locked in that car, I didn't just see my own face reflected in the window. I saw every passenger who's been canceled on, every rider who's been rated 1 star for existing, every person who's been told their place is anywhere but here." Her voice strengthened. "You built this Detroit. I'm running to rebuild it. And the difference between us is simple. You've never had to wonder if a driver would accept your ride request. I wonder every time. That's not symbolism. That's understanding what needs to change and why." The audience in the debate hall erupted, but Diane was looking at Marcus in the 3rd row, seeing him mouth the words she'd said to him that night after the kidnapping. "I'm just getting started." Election day came 8 months after Jake Sullivan had locked those car doors. Diane won with 62% of the vote, carrying every district in Detroit except the one Councilman Edwards represented. Her victory speech was brief and focused, delivered from the stage where she'd announced her campaign. "Tonight is not about revenge," she said to the crowd of supporters packed into the convention center. "It's about reconstruction. We're going to build oversight systems that actually oversee. We're going to create accountability boards with real power. We're going to make sure every passenger, regardless of their address or appearance, can get a ride without wondering if the driver has already decided they're a threat." She looked out at the crowd, found her family in the front row, found Jerome standing with other drivers who'd faced discrimination, found faces she didn't know but who'd watched Marcus's video and decided to believe change was possible. And to everyone who's still fighting their own Jake Sullivan, their own locked door, their own moment of powerlessness that the world watched and moved on from, Diane said quietly, the microphone picking up every word, "I see you. This victory is yours too. We're not done yet." But late that night, after the celebration had ended and her family had gone home, Diane sat alone in her campaign office looking at her phone. Jake Sullivan had sent one final text, just 2 words. "Congratulations, Mayor." She stared at the message for 10 minutes, her thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of her wanted to respond with forgiveness, with acknowledgement that his testimony had helped dismantle the system. Part of her wanted to delete the message unread and never think about him again. In the end, she did neither. She left the message unopened. A permanent notification she could see but hadn't acknowledged. Some doors, once locked, never fully opened again. Some relationships, once broken, existed only as ghosts of what they might have been if different choices had been made. Justice had been served. The conspiracy had been exposed. Reforms were coming. But Diane would never speak to Jake Sullivan again, and both of them would have to live with that particular mathematics of imperfect healing. 3 years later, the Facebook group Real Talk Rideshare Detroit was gone, its members scattered to federal prison or permanent deactivation from all gig platforms. But 7 new groups had formed on encrypted apps, harder to find, harder to infiltrate, operating with the learned caution of survivors who'd watched their predecessors get caught. The fight wasn't over. It had just evolved, moved underground, adapted to new scrutiny. Diane's administration created the nation's first gig economy oversight board, with actual enforcement power, mandatory bias training for all commercial drivers, and transparent appeals processes for rating disputes. Some things changed. Some things stayed the same. The spreadsheet of targeted passengers still circulated on dark web forums, growing from 1847 names to over 3,000 as networks reconstituted in shadows. But on Sundays, Mrs. Dorothy Perkins drove her used Toyota Camry to church, her photo no longer shared among drivers who'd decided she was undesirable. Marcus Mitchell graduated high school and went to film school at USC, his college essay about watching his mother transform violation into victory. Jerome Williams trained new drivers in the Accessible Transit program, teaching them what real public service looked like, and Diane Mitchell governed Detroit with the particular authority that came from understanding exactly what it meant to be powerless and choosing to use power differently. She never opened Jake Sullivan's congratulations text. Some doors stayed locked, but she opened 1,000 others, and that had to be enough.